A Rose by Any Other Name by Devorah Major. When you think of the American institution of slavery, do you think of history, black history? Do you think of slave ships, bodies pressed together head to toe, death and misery, stories of long ago, auction blocks, flesh groped and pushed, weighed in, people renamed, chained, beaten and confined, turned from human into commodity? When you think of slavery, do you think of then? Well, then, what should we call it now? When men and women chained ankle to ankle, wrist to wrist, neck to waist are taken to a place where they are confined in quarters, in blocks, in cells. Strike one! What do you call it when you take these sometimes chained and very confined people and give them a new name, be it Toby or B253476, be it Mammy or G714280? Strike two. What should we call it when these renamed, confined, chained humans, these sons, these fathers, these mothers, these daughters, these brothers, these sisters are told that they will never again be free, that they will have to work for the room they are locked in, the food they eat, and for you? What should we call it when we know that the Constitution's 13th Amendment outlaws involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted? Strike three. What should we call it? If you ask me, it sounds too much like a different brand of slavery.
Hello, everyone. I am the Reverend Nontombi Naomi Tutu. I am so looking forward to having the conversation about involuntary servitude in California and what ballot Proposition 6 would do to end involuntary servitude. I am joined by an awesome panel of amazing people with a truly deep understanding of involuntary servitude and Prop 6. And on this panel includes our friends from the Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, Reentry Coordinator Alissa Moore, Policy Analyst Jeronimo Aguilar, Advocacy Associate Lawrence Cox, and also joining us today is Joey Pagaduan, Program Manager for Impact Justice, and Devorah Major, an author, professor, and San Francisco's third poet laureate. Devorah, I would like to start with you because you wrote the poem that is featured in our opening animation. Would you please give us some context and background as to what inspired that poem and how it relates to involuntary servitude and our discussion today?
Thank you. I began as a poet in residence at the African American Historical and Cultural Society in San Francisco. And I started reading history, and I made the discovery that California, while never officially a slave state, was always a slave sympathizer state and always had enslaved people. In San Francisco Bay Area, a lot on Alcatraz. And so that I became aware that there was this unbroken history of enslavement in California that nobody ever spoke to. And because I had a brother, so very close family, as well as friends that had been incarcerated, I wanted to speak to that idea of, look at, it's right here, right now. And at the time they were doing the California 3 Strikes You're Out, where they were going to actually imprison people forever. And maybe all the person did was steal a bike or a pizza, which meant they had to be enslaved forever. And so I wrote the poem rather to speak to that, how history is now. It's not in the back, it's not over, and also try to make people aware that for California, this is, like I said, it's always been a slave sympathizer state, and thus to have people enslaved within the prison system is just a part of our history.
Mm. A powerful, powerful poem and a powerful story behind it. Thank you. Jeronimo, involuntary servitude, as Devorah has just said, is nothing new to California based on its history. But how did this free state end up legalizing a form of slavery?
Yes, thank you. It never was not a, like Devorah put it, slave sympathizer state, or I'm not sure that they could really even say that they weren't a slave state altogether, right? When you look at the first Constitution of California, let me start with the indigenous peoples, the First Nations folks of this land here, with the folks called the New World. When Europeans came, the first enslavement began upon European contact after, colonization. So indigenous folks were enslaved by various settlers, first the Spanish. When we talk about this part of the country, right, California and the Southwest, after Mexico gained its independence from Spain, became its own country, they actually outlawed slavery. So for a period of time, the type of enslavement that the Spanish were unleashing on the native folks, that stopped for a period of time, and that's until the war, called it a war, but really it was the U.S. expanding its territory into the Southwest, and you had the U.S.-Mexico War in 1848, and so that leads to California's first constitution being introduced in 1849, and this is when the governor of California, which a lot of folks don't know, the first governor of California, once it became a territory of the United States, was Peter Hardeman Burnett. And he was a slave owner. He was a staunch slave supporter. And so that tells you a lot right there, right? The first governor, and the first constitution of the state of California had a very similar exception to what we have now, except that it was the exception lied with slavery and involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime. There was so many laws that were passed subsequently that criminalized folks for really just being human beings. You start seeing laws, vagrancy laws, as they call them. 1850 is the first major vagrancy law. It's called the 1850 Act for the Government and Protection of Indians. And protection of Indians definitely didn't go on. And what it was just criminalizing indigenous peoples for anything and everything, being unemployed, spitting on the sidewalk, looking at a European the wrong way. I mean, you name it, right? It criminalized folks for just living. After they would be criminalized through the 1850 Act, they would then have their labor auctioned off as punishment for a crime. It's a history that's not talked about enough. I went to public school here in California, never heard about any of this stuff. It wasn't until we really started diving into the history of slavery, and like Sister Devorah said, really looking at what is California's relationship with slavery, right? We started uncovering all of this history that really it really needs to be talked about. And one point I want to lastly end on is this fact that history is alive. And so we talk about history a lot of times as if, oh, this was stuff that happened in the past. You can draw a straight line from the enslavement and exploitation that the exception clause in 1849 had, right? And the terror that it inflicted upon Native and African peoples and other folks as well, our Asian brothers and sisters, and many, many others. And you can say now that this exception clause that lies in Article 1, Section 6, which we're trying to change with Proposition 6, over 70% of the incarcerated population here in California is Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. And so over 70% are still getting caught in that exception clause, being enslaved. And so many of our ancestors were enslaved and exploited through the exception clause, we could say back in the 1800s. And many of us now that have, been incarcerated are feeling that same exploitation now. And so it's high time that we end this. I'm very excited for Proposition 6, but it's also just the start of something major here in California.
I mean, I think what is striking for me is how both you and Devorah have spoken about history is not something that happened in the past, that we are living this history right now, and the connections between slavery and incarceration is not something that, again, is in the past, and it's not something that is new. It is a continuation of a system that has existed for a long time in California. And I guess that this idea of California as the free state might be a misnomer.
Right.
That we have all accepted that California has been the bastion of freedom and liberalism in the US. And so Proposition 6 is giving us an opportunity to start this conversation. I would like us to look at another video, another animation video, before we continue our discussion.
They'll never call it slavery. They'll never call it indentured servitude. They'll never call it what it really is. No. Instead, they'll call it punishment for a crime. They'll call it constitutional. They'll say you're getting an administrative write-up for refusing an assignment. One day, a little slip of paper got slid into your door informing you that you, yes you, are now the newest porter in the building. Congratulations! Because you have an assignment, you now have privileges that other inmates who don't work don't possess. Aren't you lucky? Effective immediately, you'll spend 127 hours each month sweeping and mopping the tiers, taking out the trash, cleaning the showers, and being cussed at because you won't pass an illegal cell phone to a cell that's directly in view of the CO station. Oh, the pay? See, what had happened was, you're new and only leads get paid, so as you move through the levels, you'll get that pay number. But maybe you got super lucky and landed a job in the education department as a clerk. Look at you, making that money. The job description is basically the same, except you get to use a computer that is a glorified typewriter and deal with teachers who act like they belong in their own classes. Except, now you'll be making a whopping 11 cents per hour. Every month you'll receive a cool $13.97 in your trust account. Somehow, even though you have this fantastic salary, you'll still be considered indigent. An inmate is indigent in California when they have less than $25.01 in their account. Yes, you have one of the higher paying jobs in prison, and yes, you're still on welfare. But hold on, you owe restitution to the Victims Fund. 50% will now be deducted to pay your fines. But don't worry, the court only imposed the $10,000 fine. It looks like, at your current pay rate, it's only going to take 119 years to pay it back. They'll never call it slavery. They'll never call it indentured servitude. They'll never call it what it really is. No, instead they'll call it punishment for a crime. They'll call it constitutional. They'll say you're lucky to have a job.
So Lawrence, if I can turn to you now, I believe you have a deep understanding of how the California criminal system is rigged. What are the top 3 or 4 facts that people should know about involuntary servitude and its impact on those who are incarcerated in California?
Well, one, to start with, I think one of the most important facts is that involuntary servitude is indeed slavery. Don't want to get the two confused. Whenever you procure labor by force and fear or through any type of threat or punishment, you are effectively engaging in slavery. So whether we try to use, we feel is the more nicer word, which is involuntary servitude versus slavery, guess what? It's the same. So I think that's probably one of the most important facts, so we could paint the picture for everyone who really don't know what involuntary servitude is. And we would be surprised that there are a lot of people in society who has no clue what involuntary servitude actually means. I'd say the second most important fact is there is nothing rehabilitative at all about slavery and involuntary servitude. So in its essence, it does nothing in regards to rehabilitation. It does nothing for our incarcerated population, for our families, our communities, nor does it do anything for public safety. A lot of people like to harp on public safety. All our tough on crime laws are usually because of the state of, our communities, because of public safety and needing to improve public safety. So I believe for sure that's probably the second most important fact to uplift. And then third, involuntary servitude and slavery from the beginning and even now has always been a selfish, imperialistic desire for free and cheap labor. Of course, for the purpose of profiteering. Because of this, in our country, we have a system that is set up to systematically and intentionally disenfranchise and invalidate our communities of color, which this also leads to, and which is also intentional, is the mass incarceration of the individuals from our Black and Brown communities as well.
Alissa, you have had firsthand experience of involuntary servitude, of slavery. Would you be kind enough to tell us a little bit about your own experience?
Well, I think for this, I'll just share my first employment when I entered the Department of Corrections and hit the main line at 17 years old. I was on a level 4 and I was, again, 17 years old, still in fact a minor. And they decided that I was going to be hair care. And what that is that they give you a kit of hot tools, and it's scissors and razor, different types of stuff to cut hair. I was very lucky to have the wherewithal to be able to keep track of those items and not let anybody take them from me. Having those items put like a target on me and made me have to fight my way out of the prison, right, at that age. And it put me on the trajectory of violence, and it put me on the trajectory of being in the disciplinary cycle in the system. And it put me at odds with my peers because obviously I was 17. I didn't know how to cut anybody's hair, but I was cutting everybody's hair, right? So when you mess up somebody's hair on a level 4, it's going to be a problem, right? So this is the way in which it started off my life sentence. And it sounds funny, but at the time, it wasn't funny at all. It was a very volatile situation, especially when you take into consideration that I was under heavy psychiatric medication. I had an extremely violent crime. I should have never been given any type of weapon. And then I had a series of psychiatric diagnoses that should have prevented me from being given any type of weapon. And then also, again, being a minor and being in a place with far more sophisticated individuals with significant more experience in the system kind of made me have to like step up to the occasion, and went from somebody that had taken part in relatively small crimes compared to the crimes that I would later commit in prison. And most of those were fear-based. They were not like crimes of opportunity or me being aggressive towards my peers for no reason. It was out of, survival mode. So again, it also put me in a state of fight or flight, which I remained till this day. It obviously has had some significant impacts.
Right. And at 17, you were put into an adult facility, right? And you were not in the juvenile detention system.
No, the way it works is that as soon as you decide that you're going to be tried as an adult, they take you immediately from the courtroom there to adult facility.
Oh my goodness. And, I am sure that you have heard people saying, well, you were being punished for something that you did, and that they believe that while you are in jail, that you are given opportunities for rehabilitative elements to help you rehabilitate. But in your capacity as the reentry coordinator for legal services for prisoners with children, what have you seen as the impacts of forced labor on individuals reentering society? Do the skills that they are given? Are they given any skills in prison that they can transfer into skills for jobs as they start to rebuild their lives?
Okay, well, I'll first say that most of these types of programs where you can get an education or whatnot are within certain time limits. And in the California Department of Corrections, you must serve those 8 hours of slave labor. And anything you do aside from a medical or psychiatric docket comes second to that, including family visits, including regular visiting, including any type of self-help or educational program beyond, a GED. It really is leaving our people coming home from incarceration with little to no choices. But hopefully some people, given the option, will choose education, will choose, vocation, will choose to address traumas. And for me, if it's 1 in 100 of the individuals that are coming out of incarceration that actually decides to take that time and go to school, it's going to make a huge difference, because I know, like, as far as for myself and my counterparts here today, like, if we were able to use our full capacity to focus on education, and we came out of prison as, with our doctorate or a master's degree, our communities and our lives and our future would look completely different. There's just, you can't even compare the two.
Well,
Can I add to that?
yes, please, Lawrence.
Okay, I kind of want to back up just a little bit and add to some of the first question you asked her. Alissa, she usually, when you ask people or you listen to people's stories of how being forced to labor while you were inside, you would hear a different story. But usually the story that you would hear would for sure be that individuals such as myself, I've done 17 years myself behind the walls. And I can remember a time where I wanted to take my college courses, or I wanted to get into some type of vocation because I wanted to have some type of skill. But I was instead signed to work either the main kitchen or a satellite kitchen for nothing, or for maybe a couple of cents. And when I tried to get out, my only way to get out from what they would explain to me is intentionally get a write-up. And then once you get a write-up, get another one. And then after that second write-up, we will take you out that job, and then you can go do that. But here's the thing. Both of those write-ups, they're disciplinary infractions that potentially adds more time to your sentence. And if you're someone who has to go to the board will look at those disciplinary infractions not as that you wanted to go do something better with your time, but that you can't follow rules. So with that, they will be able to say, well, if you can't follow rules in here, then how can we expect you to follow the rules when we let you out? So no, we will deny your parole, sometimes 5 to 10 to 15-year denials. But I say all of that to say, Alissa, she points out something that people probably rarely ever points out, is the fact that involuntary servitude and forced labor is so prioritized to where they're not even thinking of the potential ramifications. They're not thinking whether a person is qualified to do that job. They're not thinking to all the things that can transpire and spiral out from forcing someone to do a job in the first place. She presents a story to where she had no clue what she was doing. And anybody, we all know from the streets, and of course, if we're in that barbarous environment in prison, you mess up somebody's haircut, that is a problem. And so to put a juvenile freshly into an incarceral system on a level 4, as she said, and just say, you go do this that way, guess what? The more jobs that the incarcerated population takes over, that means staff don't have to do them. So they prioritize delegating and forcing individuals to do work, usually not because they feel it's a part of rehabilitation, but to do that. And I just wanted to highlight that there are so many different things like this, how her life began to the trajectory of her life because of just simply that. Most people wouldn't see that or realize that, but decisions had to be made. Behaviorisms probably were ingrained within her. And like I think that was something that a lot of people don't pay attention to, how it affects us in so many different ways when you are forced to do something. And what she presented, many people really don't focus and pay attention on how that can be a domino effect and spiral out of control in ways that we probably don't even think about.
And just to add to what Lauren said real quick, the Border Patrol terms did deny me several times. I ultimately ended up serving 25 years on a 15 to life sentence that I could have probably, with all probability, been paroled after 12 years and 9 months. And in addition to that, I'd just like to state real quick, for the majority of people that are coming out that I'm assisting, agency is key, right? Because a lot of the women in the carceral system are coming into the carceral system immediately suffering from some type of post-traumatic stress disorder. They've been victims of sexual assault, rape, and harassment throughout their life, even molestation in their younger years, and then coming in, so they've never had any agency in their life or over their body. And then they come into a system that ingrains that absence of agency, and then they're paroled and expected, because they received a parole docket, to be considered rehabilitated and set free to just go exercise this great agency that they've developed in the Department of Corrections, right? When they've never had a chance to exercise that agency in their own lives or even over their own bodies, So I think when we talk about involuntary servitude for women that have oftentimes experienced significant trauma prior to ever going to prison, and probably prison might seem safe, even with all the horrible things that are happening. It could be less than what they were suffering from on the outside. A lot of women that come into the system, you have to understand, come from backgrounds of sex trafficking or sex work by force or by necessity, right? So like these traumas are compounded by not being able to develop any agency while incarcerated, right? So no wonder that people are coming out of the system and the recidivism rates are, what they are, and that people are struggling with, any number of things, addictions and so forth, as they face reentry, because we are not allowing them to utilize the rehabilitative dollars that we're all being so heavily taxed for. CDC did not give us the tools to be where we are today, and we did make it, yes, and I'm very happy and relieved that I can be of service to the family that I left behind. Like I said, we are the anomaly. We are not the standard. This oftentimes does not happen for our peers, our counterparts, and our loved ones coming out.
Right. Because the system is set up to make you fail.
No, it is functioning exactly
as
it is meant to maintain the slave force,
right,
that the exception clause created. It is not flawed. And I think that's important to remember as well. The system is not flawed. It's functioning exactly as it is designed to.
I think that circles right back to how we started, right, with the history. To Alissa's point, I mean, the first indigenous and African folks were enslaved and exploited. That was the exact reason, and it's the same exact reasons that drive the exploitation and enslavement of the incarcerated population today.
Yes, right. Oh my goodness. Devorah, I know that you wanted to say something too.
I wanted to just make 2 points. One, you had asked about in terms of our skills given that can be used on the outside. Sometimes they are, but you have someone who's trained in firefighting, but according to California law, you can't be a firefighter if you've been a felon. You have someone that was actually trained to be a barber, but because of California law, you can't be a barber because you've been a felon. So there are a certain amount of people who get skills that they're not allowed to use. The other thing is that Alissa was speaking of, many of the jobs in prisons are in-prison jobs, but major corporations are profiting. I always wonder, How many people, if they were able to get jobs doing it on the outside, working for IBM, working for Victoria's Secrets, working for McDonald's? These are corporations that are part of the involuntary servitude, the enslavement of people in the prisons. So that, yes, but those jobs aren't provided outside, they're provided inside for no pay. So I just wanted to make those 2 points.
And I mean, and those are powerful points. I mean, especially I think this idea that, when we say people are being rehabilitated, that they are being skilled, but then they're in the catch-22 that their skills cannot be transferred in the outside world because of the laws that we have that limit. It is seriously that we want people back in jail. That is what we are doing. We are setting people up to only go back to jail. Joey, you had a point that you wanted to add, please.
Just to touch back on what Alissa and Lawrence so eloquently spoke about, it's a huge failing by and large of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is that they don't adequately prepare people for their eventual release, right? Yeah, sure, some people may get some jobs that they might be able to leverage when they get out. But by and large, right, people are coming out, they're paroling after 10, 15, 20, 30, even 40 years, undereducated, undertrained, and many have little to no savings because of the low or no compensation for work, right? If somebody doesn't have a support network or family upon release, a successful reentry can be challenging to say the least. When somebody's assigned a job, just like Lawrence and Alissa both spoke about, if you refuse your work assignment, you're punished. You're deemed program failures. I've seen people get transferred to higher level prisons because they say they're a program failure and they can't live on this yard anymore. And what happens when they go to a higher level? They end up getting write-ups, get caught up in violence, get caught up in that cycle to where their sentence may have been a determinate sentence of 10 years. Next thing you know, they're serving 20, 25 years because of extra violence that they had to do just to survive. Right. At the very least, you're going to lose privileges, right? Privileges that they say they're giving you, like phone, visits, loss of recreational time on the yard. Being able to choose whether you want to work or not prioritizes your rehabilitation. If you have a work assignment during the day and you want to take a self-help class, and let's say the self-help class starts 15 minutes before the end of your work assignment, they won't let you take it. They won't let you take it because they say it conflicts with your work assignment. Even if your supervisor, everybody says it's okay, you can't take it, right? So it lets people concentrate on their schooling, vocational education, going to mental health, right? Other rehabilitative programs. They can choose to pursue art and uplift themselves and other people. And they just don't have that choice right now. Because if you refuse, there's going to be a punishment, right? And the choice made under duress is no choice at all.
Exactly. You have added has been just powerful. And Joey, I want to come to you, but I would like us to see this video first before I ask you this question.
Born into a place that didn't want me. A child growing on toxic words, following orders until I had enough, choosing to make bad decisions, believing I had no other choice, lies I told myself to justify my wrongs, sent away to spend life in a box, again following orders, this time from little green men, caught up in the daily, thinking, this is life, this is me doing life, not realizing I'm only existing, doing what I was told, as if I was a child again, forgetting I was sentenced to separation from the outside world, from life, from family, from everything, but not sentenced to an unending existence of slavery, working for pennies and sometimes for less. Like Sisyphus, I pushed that boulder. Up, up, up it went, only to roll down. Convinced I was the lucky one. Convinced I deserved this. Lies I was fed. Lies I repeated to myself. Lies I believed. Complacently brainwashed. As if I was a child again, forgetting that I was sentenced to separation from the outside world, but not to an unending existence of slavery. Like Sisyphus, I pushed that boulder. Up, up, up it went, only to roll down, and I, naive I, pushed that boulder. Like Sisyphus, I pushed that boulder, convinced I was the lucky one, convinced I deserve this.
Oh my goodness, Joey. So that is something that you wrote. Can you share some of the context and the background to that story, to that powerful, powerful poem?
Yeah, Naomi. So I was asked to write a piece about my own experiences with incarceration and how it intersected with slavery. This was when Prop 6 was still ACA 8. And well, I did a lot of reflection. I remember the day I left county jail after my sentencing to go to prison for the first time. I was in a holding cell with 3 other people. 2 of them were waiting to be released. Myself and someone else were waiting on our bus to prison, and the guard opened the cell door and called us for to be processed. He said, "State property over here." It didn't click, so I didn't move until he called again, and the other prisoner told me that he meant us. When I got to the front of the line, the guard laughed at me and he said, "I belong to the state now." And that's the harsh reality of like how people that are convicted of crimes in California are treated. We're state property. For most of my incarceration, I hadn't given the idea that I was being forced to work much thought, right? It was very much a way of how I perceived my existence. It was the way of life. So I asked myself why I rarely questioned the fact that we, as prisoners of California, were expected to work when told. And if we chose not to, there were punishments. It was also about the culture inside, right? Everybody assigned to positions in California prisons have very little, if any, pay. Part of my poem was about this because many of those fortunate enough to have a higher pay number, and by higher, I mean maybe $1 an hour if you were very fortunate to have one of those jobs, considered themselves lucky ones. I know I did. I deluded myself into that because I believed what I was told. But at the end of the day, it's all slavery, right? And for many people with a life sentence, it's unending, day in, day out. You're required to work 7.5 hours a day, 5 days a week, no vacations, just pushing that boulder up that unending hill. You're working for free staff, for CEOs, and, they leave for vacation and you're there every day. We don't get vacations. You only get sick days inside if you have a doctor's note, but sometimes it takes 2 weeks or even longer to see a doctor. And you're better by that time if you're lucky, because I know I got worse and worse because I wasn't able to see medical when I wanted to. Right. And as many people on this panel have already spoken out, these systems disproportionately affect people of color. So the worst part was I and so many people I know readily accepted it. When we're convicted of a crime, we aren't sentenced to bad food, verbal abuse, violence, or even worse, or it's slavery. We're sentenced to the separation from our communities and families, and that's punishment enough. We need to work on a rehabilitation so when we come back out to our communities, we can contribute in a meaningful way and uplift those communities that, many of us had hurt in the past.
Your poem was so powerful, and it managed, I believe, in it to to convey a number of things, to convey the fact that the punishment is supposed to be the separation, and that in fact everything that is added on is cruel and unusual punishment, or it should be, based on the way that our Constitution is written. The fact that the pay for that work is minuscule, if any, and the fact that it is in fact slavery that we are enforcing on incarcerated people. And to say it all in such a poetic way is seriously a gift, and thank you for sharing that gift with us. Alissa, I see that you wanted to add something to.
Yes, I did want to thank Joey, and it was a beautiful poem. I'd really like to not conflate the issue of wage. We don't want people thinking that this bill, this particular bill, is focused and wage-based. But for this fight, it's about agency.
Jeronimo, I think that you wanted to add something too.
Yeah, no, first of all, Joey, yeah, that was so powerful, brother. Thank you for that word. And I just wanted to add to what Alissa mentioned on the wage piece. I think clarity we want to have with wages as it relates to Proposition 6. The first part of it is making sure that we're looked at as human beings, right? We haven't been looked at as human beings, right? And so once you're incarcerated, that dehumanization, it occurs, and once we restore that humanity and folks are at least looked at as human beings, like Alissa made the point around agency, folks have the agency to decide, have the right to consent, then God, we're going to be doing our best, eventually work on conditions and wages and all the things that every human being that's doing work, deserves to have addressed. So just wanted to point that out.
Right. And I think that, Joey, the poem made that point so poignant. And then when you started explaining your experience, that when you said that they said California property, that that you are no longer considered human beings, you are considered the property of the state. And that in and of itself should be a warning for us as a community, as a society, that anytime we say people in our community are property of, there is something wrong. There is something seriously wrong.
I only discharged parole a couple of months ago, and I was still considered state property until I discharged that number. So, I mean, it doesn't end when we leave prison.
Right.
Joy, I love the poem. I really did. It was very poignant and it was very touching. When he mentioned about the wages and how minuscule and how petty they are, and sometimes we don't get any, I am of the belief, and a lot of people are, that we need to tell those stories because we need to show how inhumane and how it's all about profit. What he didn't say is that while he was being paid pennies, depending on what job incarcerated individuals are doing, CDCR is netting millions of dollars a year from contracts with the state and other entities. Like we've been saying, since the beginning, this is nothing new. It's the same thing. It looked differently, but the playbook was the same. It's just different verbiage. But what Alissa and Jeronimo was saying in regards to not conflating the two with wages, that's the thing. Those that want to maintain control, that want to maintain slavery and involuntary servitude as a status quo, they know how to manipulate the public. They know how to control the narrative, and they know what to do it with. And I say that to point this out. Simply pointing out how inhumane and how akin it is to slavery for someone to make trivial wages or nothing at all has actually been galvanized against the coalition and this bill. And they utilized it to throw the public off and then make the public feel like, oh, this is going to cost millions and millions in untold dollars. And of course, when you get to talking about taxpayer dollars, going to incarcerated individuals who a lot of them probably don't feel like incarcerated individuals are even worth being human beings anymore, a light goes off and they see it a different way. And then they begin to fall back from it's no longer a moral issue or a labor issue or a rehabilitation issue. They transition back into that mind state as, oh, well, they're incarcerated. They need to, instead of giving my tax dollars and them getting wages, et cetera, that's the dialogue that begins to develop. That has proved so difficult to overcome, even though it's a lie. That has proved so difficult, especially with ACAA. ACAA has nothing to do with wages. ACAA is clear on its face that it's about autonomy and it's about public safety. It's about true rehabilitation, decreasing the recidivism rate. And guess what? If we want to really talk about dollars, this is the myth buster right here. Prop 6 won't require wages for anybody. Prop 6 won't cost too much money for anybody, but you know what it will do? Prop 6 will remove barriers to rehabilitation, allowing more people to access rehabilitation, the rehabilitation that they need. That rehabilitation that an individual does allow himself finally to come up under will decrease his recidivism rate. Decreasing of the recidivism rate, you know what that means? That's going to save taxpayer dollars. Right now, it costs somewhat close to $140,000 to incarcerate to pay for an incarcerated individual each year. If we could only decrease the recidivism rate by 13%, just by removing barriers in a year, if there's that, let's just say that's what they say we release 31,000 31,000 individuals are released a year. If we close to 4,000 and some change, multiply that by 140. Do you know a year that is a $500 million or more a year that this bill would save if you would actually remove those barriers to incarceration? So I just want to say that and uplift that because that is something that we have to tiptoe around when it comes to messaging in public spaces, because it's been utilized and thrown against us, even though it's not true.
I want us to, I've been picking up in this conversation people saying what Prop 6 is and what it is not, what it is addressing and what it does not address. So, Jeronimo, tell us, what exactly is Prop 6? What is it saying and what is it not saying?
It's not going to cost $1. It's not going to cost a penny to give people the right to consent. This isn't about, there's no wages that is directly tied to this amendment change. And so effectively what the Proposition 6 would do is that it would amend Article 1, Section 6 of our California Constitution. Currently, it reads that slavery is prohibited, involuntary servitude is prohibited, except as punishment for a crime. It would strike that line that says except for punishment for a crime, and it would add a couple lines that say effectively, it's not exact words, but effectively that CDCR would be prohibited from punishing an incarcerated person for refusing a work assignment. So it gives folks that right to consent in a very real way. But again, it doesn't address the wage issue. And I wanted to mention, like how Lawrence was pointing out, how the opposition and how, they've brought up the cost, and I wanted to tie it again back to history. You could have these same arguments be heard during the debates over ending plantation slavery with the 13th Amendment, right? Was what is this going to cost? This is going to be too expensive. How are we going to replace this $1 million enterprise of free and cheap labor? These were the same arguments that folks were making back then. And so that's why I talk about this degradation of society, because you not only had, the vicious slave owners that were, obviously being proponents of this, but you had everyday Americans that were thinking this way. Oh, well, yeah, it is going to cost a lot, not understanding what they were really saying. What they were saying was that, no, it's actually, we're better off enslaving and dehumanizing this population. And so that degradation, it becomes normalized over time and over centuries, to the point now where, again, indigenous, the first, this is something that, you know, our comrade, George Galvis always points out, that there was no prisons and sites of incarceration on indigenous land. You know, that arrived here with the colonists, you know. So though this prison system, this way of doing justice by punishing folks, by I'm going to make you pay for what you did, by making you suffer, that type of dynamic was brought here, you know, through the European settler experience. And so, you know, over time, it has really desensitized folks to what's really going on. And God knows we're gonna have a host of other work that needs to be done. Prop 6 is not the finish line by any means. But it really starts us, right? It really starts us on that path of saying, okay, no longer are we going to accept the enslavement of human beings. No longer are we going to accept the exploitation. And so, yeah, that's what Proposition 6 does. It's really a major turning point. Like I said, it amends Article 1, Section 6, and it gives folks the right to consent to labor. And so that is a major thing here in California.
Just to touch off on the language Jeronimo was speaking on, with this language, it's a little bit different than most states that you've seen have passed. And a lot of states, they did maybe unintentionally or unaware. Some of them may have been aware. Most of them may not have been aware that the language that they did prioritize using that did get passed only served to prop out mere symbolism. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, the Constitution may have changed, but the actual act of forcing individuals behind walls to work has not changed. That was something we prioritized making sure that we did do, is that we had language that actually did something, that not was only a crossed out or a strikeout. No, we wanted involuntary servitude and slavery is illegal, period. And CDCR cannot punish a person for refusing. But what also in the language we were able to get in there is that CDCR themselves are authorized to actually incentivize work, allowing it, basically transitioning into a voluntary workforce and able to give individuals extra credit off their time if they do volunteer to take these jobs. Now, we keep in mind 90-some thousand incarcerated individuals in prison right now. There's not enough jobs for everybody. We have close to 40,000 jobs behind the wall in the carceral system. And I say that because the transition to this point, one thing that I think we want to continue to uplift and that we need to make sure people don't believe is that if this bill passes, the prisons will shut down and no one will work. First off, you barely have enough jobs you don't have enough jobs, for the entire population. But there are so many people that want to volunteer for jobs, but can't get jobs because someone is standing in front of them on the wait list. That sometimes can take up to 5 years. I'm witness to that. It took 5 years before I ever got a job when I first got incarcerated. But you also have those who have the job, but they don't want the job and they can't get out of it unless they get themselves in trouble. So the myth that the prison population would just shut down and there would be no one to work or do jobs, yeah, they will, but guess what? It wouldn't be involuntary servitude. It would be people having their own autonomy and having the choices to say, okay, yes, I want to do this job. Let me do this job. And if I don't, I won't get punished. Publicly, we don't have any registered opposition to the ballot. But we know that our society hasn't changed overnight. And we know there are way too many who feel like, they should be forced to do it. And we know there are way too many who understand that this is an economic machine that they do not want to do away with. And so, of course, there will be great attempts to twist the narrative, to utilize, media, which they do so well, to paint a picture that's not true. We have to educate people, like Jeronimo say. We have to let them know what Prop 6 is and what Prop 6 doesn't. But we're going to win. We got this.
Amen. Devorah.
I want to say, unfortunately, it will be a difficult, it's uphill. But actually, it's very simple. If you vote for it, you're against slavery and enslavement. If you vote against it, you're for slavery. And I think that's really part of the education process. Understand, when you're voting, if you vote against it, you're saying, I believe in slavery. And so it shouldn't be that hard, since people claim to be against slavery.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be that hard.
Right.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree. Theoretically, it shouldn't be that big of a decision. It should be a no-brainer, because as Carmen Nicole Cox said at our press conference, who would vote to support slavery in California? But again, to answer your question, what is Prop 6 and what is it not? For me, I've spoke most of this meeting as somebody that's been incarcerated, but for this portion, I would like to speak as a taxpayer, as somebody that pays heavily into the rehabilitation dollars that California receives. For me, it would mean that the rehabilitative dollars that I pay heavily into are going to be utilized in the spirit of which they were voted for by Californians, and not misused to upslave the slave force that they currently have.
Wow. The power of this panel is not only the lived experiences that you are sharing, but the deep thought that each of you has put in to the work that you are now doing. And I hope that people take advantage of the wisdom that you are offering around the system of enslavement that exists in California, but also the opportunity to end that in California. So I would like to give each of you an opportunity to make a closing point about your story, about Prop 6, about your hopes for this campaign, for your hopes for California, whatever it is that you feel would wrap up this conversation and give people with something to ponder after they have watched you today.
Statistics say that, and I believe this is for the United States and as a whole, not only California, but the ratio between those that are in college, in a college dorm, and those that are incarcerated. So for every one African American that's in a college dorm, living in a college dorm, there's 3 that are incarcerated in a prison. For brown folks, it's only slightly lower, 2.7 for every one Chicano or brown person that's in a college dorm. There's 2.7 that are housed in a prison or in some kind of incarceration. I mean, it's these type of statistics that are just mind-blowing. The fact that we have, we incarcerate the most people in the entire world. I know me and Carter were talking about that recently, and statistics that we hear a lot, but they're not talked about enough, obviously, because if they were, then Proposition 6 would be a no-brainer, like we're saying, right? Because this is something that it's not going to cure all of that, but what it does is that it at least begins to really get at the foundation, the root of these things, right? We know that the exploitation and the profiteering that's being had is what makes mass incarceration such a lucrative system for the state. And so if we can attack that here and really give folks that agency and start changing that, it can go a very, very, very long way. And so I would just close with a challenge. Anybody that's watching this, get out and vote, register to vote. There's just a rare time when we have the chance to really be radical with our vote. And this is an opportunity to do so. Get out there and vote, tell your people, text, call, post on social media. This is it, y'all. Let's make history. So I challenge everybody to get out there and get active.
Amen. Yes, Joey.
So as Devorah said in her poem, like every person that's incarcerated is somebody else's child, sibling, relative, parents. I want people to think about how they would want someone they love to be treated, how they would want to be treated, and if they would want to be able to make their own choices. And like, as Alissa said, have agency over their own lives.
Yes, yes, indeed.
California's exception clause was put in the Constitution 175 years ago by an all-male legislature. So if you look at the demographics of legislative body we have in the state today, it is anything but all white male. It made it through the assembly and it made it through the Senate. I want people to really be focused on the fact that these are people, and give them, their humanity, because we have dehumanized them for decades by calling them inmate, and prisoner and convict, and detaching their humanity from them by removing their name, and giving them a number. So these are people, and for the vast majority of these individuals, they're coming home. Rehabilitation is key, and we have to give this to the people if we want to see the landscape of California change for the better over time.
Thank you. Thank you. Lawrence.
Slavery is illegal. Slavery should have been abolished and abandoned a long time ago. Here in 2024, we have the opportunity to do that. But I also want people to know that Prop 6 is a moral issue. We are human beings, whether we're incarcerated or not. To continue to prioritize anything over someone's humanity, over someone's right to better themselves, is morally wrong, period. So it'll always be a moral issue. It is also a labor issue. Individuals should have the same equal rights that everybody else have, whether they're incarcerated and working or whether they're outside of the carceral system and working. Worker rights are real. People have died for worker rights. Like the struggle for worker rights have been so monumental across these states, and the Prop 6 is another one. And then the last thing that I really want to leave with, public safety.
Yeah,
this is about public safety. If we are tired of looking at our communities the way that we see, if we are tired of seeing individuals constantly coming home, committing crimes, going back to prison, being homeless and struggling on the streets with mental health issues, then guess what? Prop 6 is one of those bills that will remove barriers to give people opportunity to partake in what it is that they need so they can rehabilitate effectively before they hit the streets. So this is a public safety issue. And I think that's all I would leave it.
Right, right. So it seems, Devorah, that you started us and you're going to close us.
I wanted to, everything everyone said, yes, it's a moral issue. Yes, on its face, it's very simple. You're pro or you're against slavery. But I think for those people who tend to have a kind of conservative thing and they want safer streets, then you need to vote for Proposition 6. Right. You know, that they're afraid of what's going on in the prisons, then you need to vote for Proposition 6. They need to understand that by outlawing slavery, you create opportunities for education, for mental health counseling, for the kind of things like arts programs and other things that help people to have lower rates of recidivism, more successful outcomes when, yes, the majority of people do come home, do get out, that it is in those conservatives who are tough on crime and all this stuff, they need to be voting for Proposition 6 because it will alleviate their issues. And they need to be very clear on it. Making that space makes everyone safer. It makes for a better society.
Mm-hmm. You have been an amazing panel, and your input has educated me, and I really do hope that California voters will take the time to listen to your voices and have a clearer understanding of this particular issue. And I hope and I pray that we will see an end to legal slavery in California in 2024. And for those who have watched this, if you want more information, please go to voteyesprop6.com. And thank you again to this amazing panel. Thank you for the time, for your wisdom, for your sharing your stories. Thank you all for being here.